Today I'm going to talk to you about what I believe beginners should be learning, and this is a really big topic. I already made some shorts about it, and I even got a comment that this was, or at least part of it was kind of bad advice. But I think beginners and even some advanced photographers, they fall a lot into the trap of focusing on camera settings and asking for camera settings. You know, they see a good photo and they go like, oh, which camera settings you used? Many times by doing this, they are actually missing the point. And starting from what I mentioned in my shorts video, you shouldn't be asking for the camera settings. The camera settings are irrelevant. I'm going to be honest with you. Most of the time, if you have a photo and the photo was taken at f5.6 or if it had been taken at f8, they would look the same. Okay, if you have two stops difference, it is noticeable, obviously, but you might only realize it if you look at photos side by side. And sometimes the fact that the photo has more or less blur in the background, it's not really the reason why the photo is good. If the photo has a good composition, probably it would have been a good photo taken at f2.8 just as much as at f11. It wouldn't matter. And the same is true for speed. If you shoot a photo at 100th of a second or 200th of a second or 2000th of a second, sometimes it's not even visible. If people are static, you don't see it. You see it if there is motion blur. Just the same way that you see the aperture if there is some background blur. Usually my rule is, if it's not visible on the photo, then it doesn't matter. What I believe people should be asking is, if you see a photo and there is a visual element that is unusual. Let's imagine the person used the lower shutter speed, okay? And there is some motion blur. And there might be a reason for that. As I can give you an example, a practical example. It's when you're doing these panning shots of cars and moving vehicles, you get this nice motion blur, while the person or the vehicle is still quite sharp. And this is a specific technique. So what you should be asking is not which camera settings you used, but you should be asking, which technique was this? How do you do it? What's the process behind it? Because even if you're trying to do this, maybe if you're shooting a car on the road, a normal car on the road, and you're slightly far away from the car, you will need, let's imagine, 1/60th of a second to get some nice blur. If you're shooting a superbike motorcycle at 300 kilometers per hour, 10 meters away from you, and I've done this, even at 100 or 1,000th of a second, you might still get blur. So it really depends on what you're doing, and it's much more important for you to understand what technique is this, how do you do it, what's the process behind this technique, why does the photographer choose one speed and not the other, and which elements do you have to pay attention to. Like if you want a blurry background, you might get a blurry background by opening up the lens, but you might also get a blurry background by getting closer to your subject or getting the background further away from your subject. So it's much more important for you to learn that this is how you do it, this is the process, and this is the variables that you can play with in order to get that result, instead of just asking for the camera settings. The question you should be asking is, which technique is this that I'm seeing on the photo? And this brings me back to what I said earlier, that if it's not visible, it probably doesn't matter, because it doesn't affect the photo visually. And this is probably the biggest mistake I see everybody doing. Even some really advanced photographers do this. They care a lot about the gear, and I spoke about gear in another video. They care a lot about camera settings. And I think sometimes people forget that photography is still a visual art. And this is why I say that if it's not visible, it doesn't matter much, because yeah, you can have different ways to get to the same result, but that's what matters. It's the result, the photo itself, and what's visible on that photo, because that's what the people that look at the photo will see. They won't see your camera settings unless you write them. They won't see which gear you used. They will see the result. And the result is what matters. When you start a photography degree, and I've been there in the Fine Arts University in Lisbon, first semester or first year, you don't learn anything about cameras or gear. You're learning, I had drawing classes, I had visual culture, where they're just showing you images, paintings, drawings, photos. So you're learning about visual culture. You're educating yourself visually to understand what are the meanings of colors, because there is the whole color theory, and you might learn which feelings a color might portray better than others. The same way that the composition of the photo matters. People talk a lot about the rule of thirds. It's the most common rule in photography, and it's a visual rule. Like, you divide the picture in parts, like in thirds, and you organize things in your photo so that it kind of matches or you put the main focus on where the lines cross. So this is all visual, but there are more rules. And if you're studying anything like design or any visual art, painting, sculpture, you will learn about these rules. I remember learning that in Roman times, they used the proportion of, I think it was 8 or 7 heads, like the body, the height of the statue would be about 7 to 8 times the height of the head, while in Greece it used to be like one head shorter, so 6 to 7 times the height of the head. So these proportions, or like the standards of beauty, if you're shooting like beauty photography, it's an area that I'm starting to dive into. These things are what matter. You need to learn visual culture. You need to learn photography as a visual art, and not photography as if you want to be just a monkey pressing the buttons, but you don't really understand what's going on in front of the camera. And it should be the reverse. If you want to become a good photographer, you need to learn how the visual elements work together, be it composition, color, effects like blur, motion blur, alignment, like all these things matter. And exposure, you might want photos to be a bit overexposed, you might want photos to be a bit underexposed, according to the moods that you want to set in your photos. But again, you need to understand the technical side of things so that you can create the visual idea that you want. So this is very important for beginners. If you actually want to become a photographer, if you want to be a good photographer and not just a camera technician, you need to understand that learning photography as a visual art is, in fact, the most important thing you have. It's more important than learning camera settings or like lighting recipes or learning camera specs. All of these are just tools to create something visual. So I hope you think about it. Let me know what you think in the comments. And again, subscribe to my channel. I will be creating more videos like this one. Subscribe to my Instagram account, follow me on Instagram to see some of my personal projects, and hope we can chat as well. So let me know if you need anything, and I'll try to make a video for you. Thank you.